inspiration just a weird thing? I mean, you never know when it's gonna hit. It might be something you hear, something you see, maybe an aroma in the air, and it just triggers something. So you know it when you see it, or when you taste it. You know, when we opened our second restaurant, Topolobampo, our idea was that we were gonna take our favorite Mexican flavors and dishes, and we were gonna add that little inspired twist. I mean, we didn't want to reinvent the cuisine or anything. We just wanted to add some contemporary touches to it. We wanted to just add a little surprise to the plate. Like this tamalone here. This is an old-fashioned, ancient preparation. Hardly anybody in Mexico knows it. It's a great big tamal roll. Let me show you how you make it. It's so ancient you can find pictures of it in some of the pre-Columbian documents. You see this big tamal roll. This is one that's already been steamed and then cooled off. Starts off with just a big sheet of masa, that corn tortilla dough, and then you put a cap of bean puree over the top and roll it all up, jelly roll style, in the banana leaves and steam it. Let me show you what it looks like when you cut into it. Down a little bit deeper there. See how beautiful that is? Now you put a little steamed tamalone on a plate that looks like this. Got a sauteed rock hen there with a nice punchy chili guajillo sauce, and well, you've got some pretty satisfying flavors. Traditional flavors, but you see when you look at it, well, it just makes you smile. That little twist. You know, cuisines are living things. They're always evolving. And that's what gets me really excited. I think it's the coolest thing to be part of the evolution of a cuisine. But I'm not alone. I mean, there's a lot of cooks all over Mexico that are sort of nudging the cuisine in all kinds of amazing directions. But you know what? They're adding that most elusive, magical ingredient of all: inspiration.
¿Sus esquites?
Muy bonito. Gracias. So I've brought you to Pujol. It's one of my favorite restaurants in Mexico City. There's a little interesting history behind it. It's owned by a young man, a chef, raised here in Mexico City. But he decided he would go to culinary school in the United States at the Culinary Institute of America. Got his bachelor's degree there, and he left the Culinary Institute and went to Chicago, worked at the Everest Room, one of my favorite fine dining places in Chicago, under Chef Jean Jojo. But he had it in the back of his mind that he wanted to come back to Mexico City where he'd grown up. He wanted to apply all of those fine dining techniques he had learned in culinary school to his native cuisine. And he's done some pretty amazing things. This is one of them. Do you know what esquites are? You can walk out on practically any street corner in Mexico City and find somebody there with a big earthenware pot filled with corn off the cob, floating around in this rich corn broth. Usually they'll throw in some herbs like epazote, and then they'll ladle it into a cup for you, top it off with a little fresh cheese and some mayonnaise and perhaps some hot chili. And you snack on it as you walk down the street. Well, Chef Enrique Olvera's esquites was just pretty much the same thing with all the fine dining twists. So what they do is they start by sauteing a little crab meat, certainly makes it fine dining, layering that into a glass. On top of it goes some pozole corn, that's the dried corn that's been cooked, and then some Mexican field corn cut off the cob. That's the real esquites part of it. You make a really rich broth out of all of those flavors of corn, and then that's poured over the top of the esquites when it's served. But now here's the ringer. It's got the fresh cheese. The epazote shows up here, and it's a little fried epazote leaf. But just look at this. Melting beautifully into our warm corn broth is a little gelatin of mayonnaise. One of the options that's always offered to people when they have esquites on the street. And it's of course served in the little fresh corn leaf, which gives a wonderful flavor to this. So at once we have delicious traditional flavor and something completely new, something completely hip. Now, Pujol is one of those really cool restaurants that has that kind of gracious, attentive service that you find in great restaurants all over the world. But I don't really come here for that. I love it. I come here for inspiration. Not necessarily inspiration for my menu, but to see how another chef's inspiration comes to his Mexican food.
You know, every time I travel through Mexico, it's hard for me to take off my chef's hat, my Topolobampo chef's hat, because I'm so inspired by all these cool regional dishes like the Guadalajara style birria that's here. This is goat that's been slow cooked with red chili marinade. Now this is a really super ancient dish. In pre-Columbian times, they would take game meat and they would marinate it in red chili, wrap it all up in leaves, and then bury it in a hot pit to kind of steam roast for hours and hours and hours. Un plato chico, por favor. Well, now birria has kind of evolved into this goat preparation here, and the cooking has evolved sort of out of the pit to, oh, muchas gracias, señor. Gracias. Now what they do with the goat is to marinate in the red chili and braise it slowly. Then take it out of the braising broth, put more of that red chili adobo on the top of it, and then glaze it in these special ovens that they've created here. Now, a stovetop oven. Makes it look pretty and shiny when it comes out. Then they chop up the meat, take it off the bone, chop it all up, and then serve it with some of that braising broth that they've enriched with some tomato and some oregano. When you order it, like I have here in the Guadalajara market, so you put a little bit of chopped white onion on the top of it, squeeze on a little bit of lime juice. It's quite a delicious evolution for birria, certainly more practical for everyday use, but you know, doesn't it get you thinking, what's going to be the next evolution for birria? Okay, here's a little peek into the way that we work in Topolobampo. We got the idea, you know, we got the birria, but I can't just serve a plate of shredded meat in my fine dining restaurant. But I don't want to give up all that wonderful, slow-cooked, braised flavor. So I got an idea. But first we got to make that classic birria, and here's the way that you make it. I'm chopping up a bunch of garlic here. It's best if you use roasted garlic. I got about 8 cloves of it there, and I'm going to put that into a bowl here. And to that I'm going to add some pure ground ancho powder. Now this isn't the chili powder you find in the grocery store, it's the pure stuff. And you want to start off with about, well, between 1/4 and 1/3 of a cup of it. Add about a teaspoon of salt. This is a highly flavored marinade. Over here I've got some peppercorns and some cumin that I'm going to freshly grind. Wow, that's going to add some nice flavor to it. Get that in there, and then some apple cider vinegar to give a beautiful tang, about 3 tablespoons of that. And then enough water to give this the consistency of a kind of thickish marinade. Once we get that ancho powder and that garlic mixed in there, I think I got it about right. But you know, it's got to be highly seasoned, so I'm going to give it a taste to make sure that I don't need more chili or more salt. Yeah, it's got that nice punch. Okay, this marinade gets smeared over a lamb shoulder roast. One that's got the bone in it is going to give us the best flavor, so that's what I've got here. Give it a nice cap of that. And then for braising, I'm going to add some liquid to it. I'm going to save a little of this marinade for my surprise here in a minute. So there we go. Now add enough water to that pot to maybe hit about, well, 1/4 inch, almost a 1/2 inch up on the meat there. And then cover it with foil. Now I'm going to do this braising in the oven, but if I was at home, I'd set it up exactly the same way in my slow cooker. Just plug it in, put the lid on it, and let it go all day long. But without a slow cooker, or when I'm here at the restaurant, I do the braising in the oven, about 300 degrees for 2.5 to 3 hours until that meat is just fall off the bone tender. So here's my little Topolobampo inspiration. Got a little of that birria marinade left, and I've got a beautiful rack of lamb. Take a little of the marinade and smear it over. Remember, it's pretty pungent stuff, so I don't want to get too heavy of a coating on there. And I'm just going to do this one side of it. And then I'm going to sear the lamb in a hot skillet. I've got skillet heating. A little bit of oil goes in there. And now the top side down, what we call the fat cap side down, we're going to lay it right into the skillet. When that gets browned on one side, I'll flip it over. Okay, now I think it's about browned and beautiful looking there. See, look at that. I got my oven heated to 500 degrees, so I'm going to slide it in and let it roast till it's just beautiful medium rare. I've already pulled out the birria. That's how I got the temperature of the oven up to 500 degrees. Look at that. Now, unveiling there. Okay, I'm going to take some of the marinade from the top and get it down into the braising juices. Look at that. Okay, I'm going to dissolve it in there nice. And then I'm going to lift out that tender meat. I said it's going to be fall off the bone tender. Okay, these braising juices, minus the few bones that have already fallen out here, I'm going to tip into a saucepan so that I can reduce them a little bit and add some extra flavor. So back on the stove we go. The extra little flavors that are traditionally added to the birria broth are some roasted tomato, and I've got a little of it here, just some roasted tomatoes that I chopped up, and I'm going to add those right in to the pan. And then a little bit of Mexican oregano. You know this stuff. It often comes in the whole leaf form, sticks, twigs, and all. So the way you handle it is to crush it between your palms. A couple of little twigs that I didn't get out of there. That releases all the aromas, and it smells so good. Ooh. Add that in there. We'll let that reduce for a little while, while we go to the plating. Now we've got to season this reduced birria broth. Now a little of the shredded birria meat, like that. A nice ladle full of this broth over the top. Yeah, that's looking pretty delicious. I've got a little cracked corn cake here, like a little polenta cake to go on the plate. I think that's a delicious flavor with it. A couple of those lamb chops, and pretty luscious, and a tiny little tuft of watercress salad to finish off the plate. Well, there you got it. Birria Reconstructing. Of course, it's up to every chef to know where to draw the line when they're reinventing a dish like this. Me? Well, I'd say it's less about cleverness and more about respecting the flavor and the spirit of the original. You know, everybody says that the best traditional seafood in Puerto Vallarta is at Tino's. And who can argue with that? But the specialty of the house is pescado zarandeado. You know, that wonderful dish where they take the fish just right out of the sea and split it open and brush it with a flavorful marinade and then cook it over wood coals. Well, I can't bring the sea back to Chicago, but I'm eating a dish here that's really got my juices flowing. It's this dish that they call ostiones Nuevo Vallarta, or oysters Nuevo Vallarta style. They start by sauteing some onions and some green chilies, jalapenos, and adding some tomato to it, and then the oysters, and letting that simmer away a little bit with some of that thick crema, the creme fraiche that they have here. A little parsley goes into a little white wine. Then they serve it under a little blanket of melted cheese. Wow. It's just delicious. I've got this desire to just take this dish to the next level. Okay, so here's my Topolo take on Ostiones Nuevo Vallarta. Got some onion, tomato, and chopped serrano chili, some browning butter in my skillet, and I'm going to saute all three of these ingredients together in that butter until they begin to soften. All the juices of the tomatoes have evaporated and those onions are soft. Okay, it looks like those are about ready, and I've got some shucked oysters over here, and I'm going to drain off all of their juice because I want to use that juice to make our sauce with. I'm going to add that back to the skillet here. And a couple of other flavorings can go in there as well. I got a little soy sauce to go into it, about a tablespoon or so. A good dollop of white wine. And some thick Mexican crema. There we go. Now I'm going to let that simmer together, stirring it all up until we've got it about the consistency of a light cream soup. Then we'll add the oysters and poach them. Now it looks like it's thickening up nicely, so we'll slide those oysters in. Plump, beautiful oysters. And I've got a little chopped parsley, sprinkle in all over the top of it there. Guess you could use some cilantro if that appeals. Now, about 2 or 3 minutes is all this is really going to need for those oysters to plump up and cook to just the way I like them to be. Okay, so it looks like they're just about ready here. I'm going to give it a sprinkling of salt, stir that in, and then of course I got to give it a taste before I put it in this beautiful dish I've got planned for it here. I'll use just a touch more. The last ingredient to go in is a little of this grated Mexican cheese, the queso añejo. I suppose you could use some Parmesan to do exactly the same thing. And stir that. That'll give it a nice, rich finish. Clean, classic, beautiful flavors. Now I've got a nice dish set out for this. It's going to be a lovely main dish. Ostiones Nuevo Vallarta. For my garnish, I picked these little pea tendrils out of the garden. I thought they'd look really pretty. They'll add a nice springy touch. A few chive blossoms. Have you ever tried chive blossoms? They're lovely. They've got a nice little chive-like flavor, but the color on the top is just stunning. Topolobampo-Style Ostiones Nuevo Vallarta. It's a funny thing, inspiration. Sometimes it's about new ideas. Sometimes it's about reinventing old ones. Or sometimes it's about just realizing that some really wonderful, really simple things don't need much added inspiration at all. They're pretty much perfect just the way they are. You know, for me, it's all about the story. You know, when I really get a dish, its essence, the soul of it, then I understand its story, and I bring that story home and I tell it in my own words. My muse? Well, it's always Mexico. But the stories never end.